our final questions for our final panelist here, Robin Smith from VL Omni. And we're just going to quickly overview the implementation of GDPR compliance for VL Omni, just telling the story of what it required and what it means at a business level, but also talking about the impact of GDPR on e-commerce more broadly. So Robin, can you tell us about your journey to GDPR compliance for VL Omni? Details like how long it took, what was involved would be extremely useful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jessica. And this has been very interesting listening to Neil and to Guy, and putting it in context of some of the things that we have gone through at VL. We began looking at the GDPR and the impact on our business and our processing back in the middle of 2017. There was a fair amount of press that was coming out around it, and we felt from a strategic perspective that it was time to do an assessment of were we a company that was going to be impacted by this? Where were the boundaries for us? Some of those boundaries were quite clear. Others were fairly nebulous. So what we did was we engaged legal counsel both in Canada and in the EU to be able to assess what we had in place. This resulted actually in a complete redoing and a rewriting of both our professional services agreement and our subscription agreement to become GDPR compliant. And then we went through an internal process, which was probably in parallel with the legal process was just as long and arduous. One of the first things we had to do was to figure out where we fit within GDPR, and it became quite clear that we were actually a storer and a processor of data. So we did have implications from a GDPR perspective. So we went through, as Guy outlined, a full security assessment. We looked at our logins, how we were managing that on our SaaS platform. We looked at things like encryption, the types of encryption we were using, how we were accessing data across the platform between the front end, the back end, and our portal. We also went through a whole assessment on ongoing security. How did we manage ongoing security? We also went through a full mapping of our data movement. How did we move data between the various components of our platform? And where did we receive data from, and where was it going to? And what were the implications regarding things like consent, for example? In our world, we receive data from platforms like Amazon or Shopify or bricks and mortar retail via EDI. How does all of that factor into consent? Because we are a receiver, we process it, and then we move it on to other platforms. How do they downstream handle consent? How do they handle the data, and what are the protections in place? So these were some of the things that we went through. We also implemented a process where we diagram for the customer all of our data movements so that they have full visibility on where we're moving data from and how we're moving it and where we're moving data to. And we do this with every integration that we set up. So it's impacted our business positively, I will say. It's forced a level of discipline and accountability and documentation that we didn't have, which I think was actually a very good thing. And it's been especially positive dealing with an international audience. So
that's fantastic. Thank you for that answer. It was quite the long process. Building right into that question, as a data integrator, VL Omni has the unique position of being embedded in e-commerce and multi-channel commerce in some interesting ways. So we have the unique ability to see how others are managing their data, and on a scale of e-commerce at large, how are you seeing the impact of GDPR, maybe North America, Europe, into Europe, because we all work in both markets as well?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a very interesting situation, and it's it's an interesting question. So we have customers in North America and Canada, the United States, as well as the UK. And it was the drive into the UK that really precipitated the whole or wanting to dive into GDPR. There has been differing impacts. One of the things that has surprised us is the level of ignorance around GDPR, particularly in North America, and how it impacts companies that operate on a global scale. There is a heightened awareness in the EU, obviously, because it is an EU-based protocol. But I also find, even amongst the partners and the customers we work with in the EU, that there are misconceptions and there's misinformation. One of the interesting things that has come out is that in the Middle East, we're seeing a fair amount of sensitivity to GDPR. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of individuals in the Gulf, in the GCC countries, actually hold dual citizenship. So there's an increased sensitivity there also. So it's been a very interesting. It's given us a very interesting perspective on people's understanding. But I would say that there's still a tremendous amount of ignorance out there.
It's very interesting that the Middle East is taking to GDPR compliance more quickly than some North American companies, to be honest. Moving into our final question for Robin here before we get into some lightning round questions just to round off our webinar. What's the role or impact of third-party data for e-commerce in relation to GDPR? We did touch on this a little bit earlier with e-commerce and shopping carts and consent around that one, but maybe we can dig into this as a panel.
Well, I think just to round out, for us, when we mapped out where data was coming from and where we were moving it to, because we are a point-to-multi-point solution, we may receive, for example, data from a Shopify Plus site that's related to an EU individual. So that individual goes on, places an order. The payload, if I can get technical, the payload includes personally identifiable information to a living individual. So we need to make sure, A, that that's encrypted. But consent has been a nebulous issue. How we process, store, and move that data now becomes a bigger issue, because if you think of a transaction, we move that data down into an accounting system, but we could very well be moving that into a marketing automation platform that the customer is using, where they are now being nurtured, they're receiving newsletters, they're receiving emails. And so one of the issues for us has been how does consent flow down from the original source, say from a Shopify store, through us down to that marketing automation platform. And obviously there are the opt-out mechanisms on the marketing automation platform. But is the customer even consenting to that? And is the company that is the brand that is selling out on the internet, are they even aware that they need to get that consent? So these are some of the issues that we've run into, and raising that subject with our partners has been a difficult matter at best, because a lot of people, again, don't feel that either GDPR applies to them, or don't have a full understanding of the implications of it.
I agree. Thank you for those answers, Robin.